DDOT's notice identifying the 600 block and not the 400 block of condensers as the area of planting trees. After some discussion, DDOT removed 14 of the trees. The 3 remaining trees to be removed are adolescents American basswood trees that may grow up to 60 feet tall and 30 feet wide. They are near the property line of the walkway for 450 Xenia Street, a condominium. The owners are not asking for the trees to be removed, but to be replaced. And the replacement can take place on the same block. Residents of this condominium have since requested the final removal of the trees based on an evaluation of the property value and a reasonable fear that these trees, once mature, will be large enough to make it difficult to see through and around a walkway, which is a public safety concern. The requests have been at our performance budget hearing and also through phone calls and emails. Prior to drafting this emergency, I wrote to the director of DDOT, Director Lott, asking for replanting of trees from the property line of Xenia, 450 Xenia Street. And to my understanding, that the request was denied. The Advisory Neighborhood Commission 8E has written a resolution asking DDOT to remove the tree. The owners fear that the maintenance and costs will fall upon them to maintain the trees they grow through the sidewalk. They also believe that DDOT has not been a good partner in the maintaining of these trees, proving to potentially overgrowing these trees and behind the condo. Greatly appreciate the support of this emergency brigade.
We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I know we talked about this briefly at the breakfast meeting, and I want to be respectful, of course, to my fellow ward colleague and what I think he is trying to accomplish at the request of some of the residents here. So I want to just represent what I have learned from the Department of Transportation, just to make sure that the facts are out there from their perspective. The trees are planted in the public right-of-way, and they were replacing diseased trees, and so a large number of trees had to be removed, and then DDOT and their urban foresters worked to create a replacement plan. That notice went out in December of 2019, and the planting was completed about a year later in November of 2020. After that, as I think my colleague noted, there were then some concerns raised. In spring of 2021, DDOT met with residents and property owners on site. They removed 14 of the 22 trees that were planted there. But DDOT has told me that they strongly disagree with this emergency legislation, and the executive branch has also said they support DDOT's position and do not support this. The census tract where these trees are located has the second highest heat island effect in the district. Planting additional trees and expanding our tree canopy is one of the ways that we address that. I think many of us have now seen pictures of these trees. They're about 6 inches in diameter and fairly small trees. And so I would share the perception from DDOT and from their professional urban forest team that we would want to keep these trees, and in particular, make sure we're growing our canopy. I think that's an important part of that. I know that there were community walkthroughs that looked at almost 2 years ago, a community walkthrough that resulted in the current configuration of this, of where the trees are. And again, I think we've had some pictures that have been shared to take a look at this. So I just want to share that I do believe that I'm going to back up DDOT on this one in terms of not supporting removing these trees. I don't think that's the role that we should be playing. I would, if I can, with my remaining time, Councilmember Tran-White, if I could just ask a question, because one of the things that got pointed to me was in the emergency, it doesn't specify which trees the legislation is seeking to remove. The legislation says remove the 3 trees located on or near the property line and walkway. And one concern is that it also would not clearly tell DDOT, if this were to pass, which trees are actually the problematic trees. So I just wanted to ask if you wanted to clarify for the record which trees you're referring to.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Allen. These are the trees that are along the actual walkway. They are not designated by any number or letter to give a specificity to where the trees are. We provided, they provided the picture to get clarity on that. The picture was provided to, I believe, new chairman. And if need some clarity on this, we can probably label the trees ourselves, but those new trees are posted to the sidewalk.
Okay. I guess I'll just end. I think we don't want to remove our tree canopy. I think we want to do everything we can to expand our tree canopy, and I think we know the many effects that are well documented about making sure that you've got a successful, healthy tree canopy and how that improves and supports a community. So I will not be supporting this emergency today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Let me see if anyone else wishes to speak at this time.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, Councilmember Henderson.
Councilmember White, I think you mentioned in your statement that the community wanted the trees removed and replaced, or was that inaccurate?
That was accurate. The issue was not with the trees itself. I heard about the economic impact of creating trees and environment needed there. I think that's needed all throughout the district. But the issue was the type of tree it is and how the tree long-term can have an effect on the property, how big and massive these particular trees can grow. So they were asking about a replacement of the trees and a different type of tree, yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tran-White, you wanted to be recognized again?
I just want to get clarity on that, Chairman, and also to alert members that, you know, we believe in creating trees and what trees has done for the environment. And we've been working with Casey Trees throughout the ward on several different projects. But again, we want to note that these are homeowners who are concerned about the value of their home, and them have to be responsible for these particular trees. And I just believe that DDOT can be more friendly in responding to the needs of the community with their requests. And if they're requesting different trees, I don't see what the big problem is. It's almost the government's imposing its will on its residents, and we use the government's technical issue to justify this type of leadership that is unacceptable in our community. And so I ask all my colleagues to vote in favor of this, and especially to replace those trees with some more reasonable trees in the community.
Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask a question of Councilmember Trayon White via you. Are we to understand that the issue that the community has is with the type of trees that are planted, and they want a replacement of those trees?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember McDuffie.
A question to Councilmember Tran White. I do want to recognize, though, for some who might be at home listening, I think, at least for me, this measure is a more complicated issue than it may seem on its face initially. And while I push as Ward 5 council member to expand the tree canopy in certain parts of Ward 5, namely Ivy City, I also recall some of the pushback I got from neighbors because there was very little space along the street to plant trees, and thus DDOT created tree boxes that went into the actual street and were bump outs from the sidewalk that took up parking and created an issue for neighbors who were more concerned about the parking than they were about having a better tree canopy in the community. And it seemed to pit those two issues against each other, one around the desire to address heat effect, the heat island effect in Ivy City, in a community that had very little tree canopy in certain streets, and a history of disinvestment in the community with the real desires and quality of life issues that homeowners raise with parking. And I see some similarities in this debate here this morning with the need to expand the tree canopy in parts of the city that I think perhaps have been neglected in previous years. And I think this council's been really conscious of doing that. And I appreciate our efforts over the last several years to expand the tree canopy in parts of the city, wards 5, 7, and 8 in particular. And the expertise of the urban forestry professionals in how they are planting trees and maintaining trees. I will tell you, I still question whether there is appropriate level of consultation and engagement in the impacted communities. And hearing the representation of Councilmember Trayon White has expressed about homeowners, taxpayers of Ward 8 who have a real concerns around public safety, quality of life, and what the community actually just desires in terms of these trees is something that resonates with me. And to see the pictures, and thank you for sending the pictures, Councilmember Trayon White, of what the trees look like, but also thinking about what they will look like in the future. And then looking at the mature trees that seem not to have received the sort of upkeep necessary to really, I think, have residents want to have additional trees in their community. So I had a question initially, but I don't know that I even need to ask a question in order to support this at this time. Hopefully there can be better engagement. Councilmember White, do you know whether the folks in the government, DDOT, et cetera, engaged the community about what types of trees would be planted before they were planted?
No, I don't. I do know that one of the real issues is that DDOT has to take the ownership that these trees should have been located at the 400 block of Connoisseurs, but they planted them at the 600 block of Xenia. And so that could, I mean, that's another issue that DDOT, I'm not sure if they spoke to Councilman Allen about that. That, to my understanding, that was the error on their part, or Williams Place as well. So, I don't know the type of trees, but.
So just for clarification, are the trees that we're talking about in question still planted at the location that was, where they were planted by mistake?
Yes, they just removed 14 of them.
So they didn't remove all the trees. I got you. Okay. All right. And I realize the health
Councilmember,
benefits.
your time is expired.
Additional minute, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
I realize the health benefits of planting trees and think it's absolutely necessary. But I do think, better coordination with the impacted community would be helpful. And I don't want to minimize the concerns that have been raised by the residents in Ward 8 and the need for the council member to even move this type of emergency legislation. So I'm going to support it today.
Thank you, Councilman McDuffie. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two concerns. The first is what is now for me confusion. I thought that this was a public safety issue with the trees. Now I'm hearing the concern is the residents near the trees don't want these kinds of trees. And so I would appreciate some clarification on the reason behind the emergency from my colleague, Councilmember Trayon White. The other question I have, and I don't think Councilmember White will have an answer to, but if he does, I welcome it. But we all need to understand. I do think that there is a need for better engagement on tree planting and removal. But the last I checked, the city planted some 8,000 to 10,000 trees a year. And I don't know at this point how we engage residents in planting of that many trees, particularly when we can't give folks veto power in that decision-making process. So I find myself wanting us to have more public engagement, but having no idea today what that engagement should look like. But on the issue of the need for this emergency, one, why does this need to be emergency as opposed to having a hearing? But two, what's the underlying reason? Is it public safety or is it the preference of residents nearby because of the height of the trees? I'd appreciate clarification.
I believe that both are interrelated, public safety and the issue from residents of those being too close to their home once matured and intruding upon the walkway. I think that both of them are issues that the residents and we are trying to address with this legislation. Let me say this. Contours, Xenia Street is what is considered the number one most dangerous neighborhood in Washington, D.C., 22nd in the country. And that walkway in which it shows through those particular condos and apartments is an area that residents want to be safe, and they're afraid that once those trees get too big, then it's going to create an issue where people can't see, and the lighting that was provided there will be covered up by the trees. And right now, it's not an issue yet, but once matured, the residents think that that walk path will become a safety issue because that's one of the highest crime areas in the nation's capital.
Councilmember Fruman, did you want to be recognized?
Yeah. Oh, are you done, Councilmember White?
I had 13 seconds, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the answer from Councilmember Trayon White. The rate of growth on these trees is something I think we need to look at, but also I think the issue, lower trees may cause more safety issues because the branches will be lower. I don't assume that the trunk of the tree is going to be the problem, or at least not for the next maybe 50 years, but the branches, so maybe a tree that grows taller may be better for public safety. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question that actually may go to Councilmember Allen. So as I've been listening here, it has changed a little in my mind because my impression was this was legislation to call for the removal of 3 trees that I thought that was relatively straightforward. Now I'm hearing that it's different than that it's replace 3 trees with a different, but not that the legislation says, the legislation isn't clear, but the conversation has been that it would be to replace 3 trees and move the 3 trees to another place, which has less of a kind of tree canopy issue. And I just wonder whether DDOT has ever considered, I hadn't heard it that way, so I'd be surprised if DDOT had considered it. But are you aware of DDOT considering the idea of moving the trees and replacing them so that there was a net gain to the tree canopy?
Is that to me, Mr. Freeman?
That's to you.
Through the chair. The Department of Transportation removed 14 out of the 22 trees that were planted. They moved some trees to other locations. But to what's in front of us, I can only speak to what's in the legislation, and the legislation says shall remove the trees. It does not speak to moving them, replanting them, different species. It just simply says shall remove the trees.
You know, I understand that, and that's how I read it and heard it earlier today. I do wonder whether or not, I wonder about why this is an emergency. The trees, if they were to grow to be the kind of problem that was talked about, it's going to take an awful long time. So I think we have time, and I wonder if there's an opportunity to go back to DDOT, ask them to do this different thing, which is replace them and move them, and then meet the community's needs. I can understand the frustration that DDOT may be experiencing because they had an engagement, they got an agreement to remove 14 trees, and then all of a sudden, then there's a different request. But if there's a way to square this circle where what Councilmember White is today proposing that's not in the legislation was amenable to DDOT, that would be swell.
Mr. Chairman, motion to close debate.
There's been a motion to close debate, the effect of which is that anyone who has spoken will not have another opportunity to speak. Anyone who has not spoken will have one opportunity to speak. If there's no objection, the motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, it's approved. Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think it's important to note that between 2015 and 2020, DC lost 565 acres of tree canopy. This was covered in DC this spring. They noted it's the equivalent to gouging a hole in the city's greenery the size of the National Mall. That translates to 1% loss in tree canopy in the city. And that's despite all the planting we're doing. We're not doing a good job of preserving the trees that we have. It's been noted the importance of trees in alleviating heat deserts. We certainly have that issue in Ward 1. In our case, we've even been willing to give up parking in order to gain trees. But I am no stranger to the issue of public safety related to visibility and sight lines and the ability to work with and around existing trees. So I would certainly offer myself to share the things that we've done in Ward 1 in these circumstances where MPD has been concerned about the size of a tree in an area where they're trying to gain visibility, where we've worked with DDOT and DGS to sort of thin the tree out for sight lines. So I hope that this might be an option as those trees grow bigger. Certainly if you look at them now, it's hard to imagine them growing to be a visual obstruction, but I do hope that they get to live that long life and grow that big, which is why I can't support this measure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilmember White, I'm not sure what the rules of the debates being closed are on me asking you a question, so I guess I'll form this in a statement, which is I am concerned about supporting this measure today for many of the reasons that have been articulated about the importance of the tree canopy, but I am especially sensitive to your concerns about the potential public safety ramifications, especially at a later date. I think as I look at the pictures of the trees now that look quite narrow and quite small, it's hard to imagine that, but I just heard your recent point about over many years this could create a challenge, and so I guess I would support other colleagues' recommendations to perhaps pull this today and make sure that colleagues can have a little bit more information over the next several weeks, try to work with DDOT on if something else can be worked out, and if you can't, could move this at the July meeting. But I can't support this today, but I'm interested in working with you on this issue if you were interested in pulling this today and we could continue conversations, especially about the public safety matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to this briefly, I hope, and that is to say, as a member of the council who's elected citywide, Ward 8 is my constituents, and I have to say I'm alarmed at proposals that we've had last week to cut roughly $40 million in projects from Ward 8, which would treat Ward 8 unequally to other wards with regard to street improvements. And now this legislation, which really surprises me that we've spent this much time on the issue of removing 3 trees. As I noted at the breakfast, the public policy, which is reflected in the law of the District of Columbia that this council adopted a number of years ago, is that we want to increase the tree canopy. As Councilmember Nadeau noted, over the last 2 years, the tree canopy has actually gotten smaller. There are many reasons why trees are considered valuable, and the suggestion that trees hurt property values is simply not supported by the evidence. Now, there was a note in Councilmember White's notice that says DDOT maintains that there was an agreement with the community to remove 14 of the 22 trees. So here we are removing the rest of the trees. And also, it is stated clearly in the declaration, which is before us, quote, the basis for removal is to avoid any interference with the property line and to avoid a threat to the safety of residents, because there is a concern that bad actors can use the trees to avoid detection and jump out on residents to rob or commit other crimes, unquote. So that's the basis that's in the declaration that is before us right now if we approve it. I saw the pictures of the trees on the street, which are about 4 inches in diameter, which is maybe the diameter of my elbow or arm or whatever this is. And I don't think there are very many bad actors who can use that to avoid detection, quote, to avoid detection and jump out on residents, unquote. I think this is a very bad precedent if the council is to proceed to vote by legislation to order the Department of the Department of Transportation to remove trees when it is our goal, our policy, to increase the tree canopy. If the issue is that DDOT needs to work better with the community, I won't argue with that. The trees shouldn't be sacrificed to make that point. I would hope that Councilmember Allen will pursue this with oversight as why DDOT, or how DDOT can improve its communication with the community. But the trees should not be the victim of this, and I won't be supporting this declaration, and I would urge other members to not support this as well. I believe everyone has spoken. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll? The vote is on the yes, Councilmember White.
Yeah, can I make a statement before you take the roll call, please?
As the maker of the motion, you may.
Yeah, so for the sake of clarity and understanding, I'm going to remove this from the emergency agenda today. I do want to say that, it's becoming an ongoing thing that the people in DC, and not just on this issue, but many issues around public safety, around ticketing, around fines and fees, around businesses, around housing, when residents have issues with what they want to see happen in our city, it's like the city is imposing this will on residents. They're wondering why we were trying to get to 1 million people, but the population is decreasing, right? Because the city is a top-down approach, the community engagement, as I've heard from the libraries to the recreation centers, to the public safety issues. People are not being heard, and as a result, people are going to make decisions about where they live based on the way the city treats them, how they feel comfortable living in the city, right? You can't go nowhere, you're going to get a ticket. You can't eat comfortably. The price of the food is going up. It's just becoming a place where we have to figure out what the happy medium is. And this is one of many issues I'm concerned about as we advocate and stand in the gap for residents who are homeowners, stating what they need in the community, and based on an error that VDOT did, but doesn't want to admit, right, to the public. So I'm going to remove this amendment in hopes that we can figure out something to make sure these people's property and homes are safe, and that walk area is safe, because we're not the people walking through there at nighttime. We're not the people that are getting robbed through those walkways, right? There's several robberies right there already. And so I removed this, but I hope that we can just have more sensitivity and push the agencies to be more sensitive to our residents, or we'll be losing them, as we've already lost 20,000 Black residents in the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. So the measure is withdrawn. The next item is PR 25-253, 2023 Women's World Cup Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.